We want to welcome you to the third Building Blocks for Breastfeeding Childcare Learning Bursts. This one will be talking about normalizing breastfeeding throughout your program. And we are excited to be hosting Anya Mayer from the Verner Center for Early Learning in Asheville, North Carolina, who'll be sharing some of the practices that Verner has been doing to support families and staff in breastfeeding. So we can go on to the agenda, please. Why we are doing these sessions, and also why it's important to normalize breastfeeding specifically for this session. And our why is best encapsulated in a Healthy Communities video that if you've been with us before, you've seen it, but it can't hurt to watch it again. It's very lovely. Um, and then Natasha will be talking about what normalizing is, why we need to normalize, why specifically are we saying that it needs to be normal in centers. Um, and then showing some of the standards that we use when we're talking about normalizing with programs throughout the state. Then Anya's going to present her information on the Verner Center. We'll have group breakout sessions as we've been doing for reflections and conversations, and then we'll come back and wrap up after that. Sometime around the wrap up is when you will get the link for the post assessment. So make sure you are signing in the chat box. You do not have to keep your cameras on unless you really feel like you want us to see you. I don't have a problem with that. And then let's figure out our why. So achieving health equity in every community.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Is there a place where everyone, regardless of race, economic background, or gender, grows up with the opportunity for good health, a good education, and a good job? This place is not in our heads, but in our hands. It starts with a mother and a baby. Actually, it can start with all of us. It can start with you. When you support a woman's health long before she chooses to have a baby, and when she gets pregnant, you help her receive excellent prenatal care close to her home, where you explain why breastfeeding matters in a manner and language she understands. Before she gives birth, in a baby-friendly hospital you helped establish, where you help her breastfeed her baby right away, allowing her to bond with her baby, who breastfeeds well, and you're always there to help. When this mom and baby go home, you help them some more, and her friends and family do too. And she breastfeeds her baby for at least 6 months, and gets to stay home and care for her baby, and her partner gets time too, because they have paid family leave, thanks to your efforts that made it the law. And when she returns to work, her boss encourages her to take breaks, to pump in a clean space required by the law you helped pass. And there's childcare right there, where people understand why breastfeeding matters, because you led the way. On the weekends, her family shops at a local green market you helped set up, where they buy good food that is local, healthy, and affordable, that helps her child run, play, learn, and grow up in a safe community with clean air and good water, until one day, many years from now, she gets her own job with good parental leave and has her own child and breastfeeds her. It takes every one of us to create a culture where breastfeeding is the norm and help a community become healthy right from the start. Beginning with one mother and one baby, we can help achieve health equity everywhere. Each and every one of us can make it possible.
We always thank the Kellogg Foundation. Definitely summarizes the place that childcare has in this ideal situation of a community for family that has all of the things they need to support a child and to make them the healthiest. So that's one of the things. We also want to make sure that all families are welcome in centers, and that hasn't always been the case. And sometimes in our state, it isn't the case. You can go to the next one.
All right. And that's really why we decided to start doing a lot of this work. My name's Natasha Bowden. I am the SHAPE specialist and breastfeeding consultant for Buncombe County. And we've created this team to make these wonderful trainings for you that hopefully will help elucidate some of this in the centers. One of the main core components of it is normalizing breastfeeding. And we really have 4 reasons why that there's many reasons, but this one is a lot of them. We want to support families who want to breastfeed, but don't know how to manage it during the transition to childcare. That's generally when most women lose their milk supply because of the transition between work and home and childcare. And so this support is integral to keep breastfeeding going beyond a couple of weeks. So this is a super, super wonderful time. It's also good to show families that maybe have never breastfed don't know anything about it, that this is the time when they are supported by the center that they're bringing their child to. And so the second part, it shows potential new families. And that's one of the most important things that you can do when you are giving an orientation to a new family, is to show them all the options that they have. And this is one of the reasons why it being normal and showing it as normal is someone that really helps people to feel welcome. It also allows children who have had breastfeeding experiences to see and share. This is something that you'll see in the classroom, and kids are very curious about it, but it really, if it's normal, it makes it normal for every child in the center. And the next part also, number 4, supports teaching children and families that breastfeeding is a normal way to feed infants. It's very normal in other countries. Here, it's began to be very normal to have breastfeeding and formula, which is wonderful. So that's one of the things we just want it to be normalized. And when we're talking about normalization, we also work through our different parts of how do you make a child care center breastfeeding friendly, and how is it normal? And then we'll look at the 10 steps to breastfeeding childcare. And on the CBGI's website, and this handout, and you'll be getting links to this at the end of our training, it really talks about each of the different ways to make it normal. That is really by posters, by orientation of staff, by orientation of new parents, by classroom, every single ways, by curriculum, every single ways that we work with each one of these trainings is going to pull out how to make it more normal. This is talking about how to do it in the entire center. So when you first walk into the center, is it on the wall? Do you have posters up? Do you have it in your packets? And the way to know how you're working with your center, we use different assessments. CBGI has an assessment where you can walk around and talk about, does it have in your policies? Does it have it policies for your parents and for your staff? And then Go Knapsack also has an assessment where you can assess your own center to see if you're really doing this work. Are you actually providing it through written policies? Are you providing it through your orientation packets and materials? And we'll be talking in our next training on how to do this in the classroom. So we'll talk more deeply about it. So I would like to introduce Anya. She is wonderful. She is working with the Verter Centers of Learning, and she's been the health coordinator for 3 years. She's a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill with a master's in public health and UNC Asheville with a bachelor's in psychology and health and wellness. She's passionate about research and advocacy work, and she is doing a great job. So I'd really love for you guys to welcome Anya. Yeah, take it away.
Great. Thank you all so much. I am looking forward to being here and telling you a little bit about our center. Verner Center for Early Learning is a nonprofit agency providing early care and education to over 300 children in Buncombe County. We are the Early Head Start provider for Buncombe County. So we have both Early Head Start center-based programs as well as Early Head Start home-based programs, as well as NC pre-K and childcare. We have 3 centers and our home-based program, and approximately 70 faculty and staff. And so I just wanted to provide a little bit of a perspective on how Verner thinks about being a breastfeeding friendly childcare center. We want to welcome and support breastfeeding families, but we also want to do so without shaming families who are not able to choose not to breastfeed. Oftentimes, by the time families come to us, they've already chosen which path they are taking on their infant feeding journey, but we know that childcare can be a big barrier to breastfeeding, and at Verner, we want to do everything we can to make sure that childcare is not a barrier for them, and also providing additional supports and resources, as well as normalizing breastfeeding within our community. There are many reasons families choose not to breastfeed, including family structure, medical issues, physical or economical concerns, and we just want to be respectful of every parent's choice and supporting them however we can. I will be using the term breastfeeding during this presentation, but recently we've been thinking more deeply about the language we're using around breastfeeding and making sure it's inclusive of all the families that we serve, and definitely respecting whatever terminology the families we're working with would like to use, whether that's chest feeding, body feeding, breastfeeding, what have you. So yeah, next slide. So we'll start with our first center. It's our smallest center, Verner Central, where we have 3 early Head Start classrooms and it's more centrally located in downtown Asheville. Currently, we're sharing the space with and renting 3 classrooms in a Head Start center. So space is very limited within these classrooms, and our teachers have gotten really creative on how to create a designated breastfeeding area. So you'll see in this picture there we have like an openish closet, but it's a big closet and it doesn't have any doors. So they've created a little breastfeeding nook within the infant classroom there, where they have an accordion screen if the family would like to use that, but it's got some comfy pillows and all of that fun stuff. And we also, if a parent chooses to breastfeed in the classroom, whether it's on the floor or on a couch, they're welcome to do so. Of course, during COVID, we're asking breastfeeding families to utilize the designated areas, but in non-COVID times, that is something that some parents preferred, but we'll, welcome them to do whatever works best for them. Next slide. And so here's one of our centers at Verner West. This location has 3 early Head Start classrooms and a pre-K classroom and is located west of Asheville and Candler. This is a shared space with Mount Morency Church community. So again, space is very limited, but we do have a little bit more space. So this center actually has a teacher resource room where we've created a breastfeeding corner that's connected to the infant classroom. Most of the time, families can put up the breastfeeding sign, as you'll see in the middle picture there, and have the room to themselves. But just in case, we also have an accordion room divider that families can utilize. And depending on who is using this space in the moment, whether it's a faculty or staff member who's pumping, or a parent who is providing or coming in once a day or so, will change out some of the information. So in this picture, we had a faculty member using the area to pump, and so we had different informational sheets on how to keep the pump clean and all that fun stuff. Next slide. And so Verner East is our largest site with 8 classrooms, and it's our main site where most of our administrative offices are housed. And I know for a lot of sites, real estate can be a hot commodity, and oftentimes there's sharing of offices and there's just not a whole lot of space, and it can be hard to designate a room, not just for breastfeeding, but for the sole purpose of breastfeeding. So what we've done at this site is created a meditation corner within our small breastfeeding room where when it's not being utilized by a family, teachers and staff can use it to kind of get grounded in after a stressful day or stressful moment in the classroom. And Natasha, you can go ahead and play, but you'll see that there are some posters from Resources for Resiliency with different rapid reset strategies, as well as some cushions and a yoga mat. So families, if they're breastfeeding, can also set their kiddo down for a few minutes and let them play a little, or if a family prefers sitting on the ground to breastfeed, that works too. But it's also utilized as kind of a meditation space, which has been really helpful in justifying a breastfeeding room. And then, of course, we have the handouts and all of that. So our community connections, I currently attend the Western North Carolina Breastfeeding Coalition meetings, which is really where most of the community connections that we use come from. And a few of those organizations and people are our local WIC office. They have been a great resource for many of our families, as most of them are on Medicaid and receiving WIC services. And so they have great breastfeeding support services, peer support, and as well as getting families connected with breast pumps and all of that. Of course, Buncombe County Partnership for Children, our local Smart Start organization. Natasha has been a great asset to our center for so many things, but especially breastfeeding and making sure we're always thinking about it and in our centers and how we can support our families in that journey. As well as our local area health center, MAHEC. They have a breastfeeding clinic that we oftentimes refer our families to if they're needing some additional supports. And they also, Georgiana, who I think does a lot of trainings throughout the state, does a few breastfeeding basic trainings that are 6 hours, and sometimes we'll send our in-home educators who go to the homes pre-COVID to those trainings to help support those families. So professional development, I think, is a really big part of supporting a breastfeeding friendly center. We try to ensure that breastfeeding is embedded in our centers. So all new hires, regardless of the age they work with or whether or not they work in the classroom, are getting some type of training from the start. Oftentimes, teachers in older classrooms will be the first to learn about a new sibling who may start in our infant classroom or observe children with a new baby at home playing out nursing and dramatic play. So we really want to make sure that everyone knows the ins and outs of breastfeeding and normalizing it in a way that is developmentally appropriate for the kiddos they're working with. So we use at orientation, the Breastfeeding University training. It's 4 modules. It's online, which is super helpful. And it's something that teachers might even start doing before they're officially hired and waiting on their background check and all of that stuff. It's also great because it has continuing education credits automatically attached to it, and it's free. We also do a lot of trainings around responsive feeding. One of my favorite online ones that we used this summer was I don't know how to pronounce it, but the NEMORS responsive feeding for infants and young toddlers. It's really comprehensive in everything you kind of need to know in specific situations and all of that. So we really like to use that, especially with our infant toddler teachers. And our teachers do looping. So every year we have a new set of infant teachers, and we'll do more intensive training with them as well. So in the classroom, babies are, of course, a favorite for many of our kiddos, as I'm sure they are for many of your classrooms as well. And feeding babies is a big part of dramatic play, of the dramatic play experience. And to be completely honest, I know that, breastfeeding, in some of the resources, it's encouraged to sometimes not provide the bottles, and we've tried to do that, and it is something that our children really like using, just because it's a big experience that they're seeing within the classroom, not just at home. And so our teachers have also started talking about what's in the bottle. So maybe it's mama's milk in the bottle that they've pumped specially for them, and they're going to feed it to their baby. So just finding ways to help the kiddos play out those experiences that they might be having at home, and incorporating breastfeeding into it. I've learned from experience that there are a lot of different breastfeeding books out there, and children's books out there, and it's just important to make sure it's developmentally appropriate for the ages of the children. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about breastfeeding specifically, but talks about it and normalizes it within the book. Another thing that some of our classrooms have talked about doing is creating their own classroom books. So right now they're really into creating classroom books with pictures of their children and their families. And so maybe creating a book about the different types of infant feeding or something like that. So we haven't done that yet, but I'm hoping that that might be some way we can incorporate it. Of course, we also have a few of the Mama's Milk nursing dolls, which have been a fun way to talk about the different ways that all sorts of mammals feed their babies. And then we have the breastfeeding friendly feeding practices, which I think is a really big part of being a breastfeeding friendly childcare center. So there's first paced bottle feeding, and some of you might have heard of it before, but it's a method of bottle feeding that allows that slows down the flow of milk and allows the infant to be in much more control of how much they're eating. The paced bottle feeding also mimics breastfeeding more closely than other types of, your standard feeding methods. And this has helped for some of our infants who have started to have a bottle preference. We've talked with families about possibly switching to that paced bottle feeding method, and it's just a little bit slower and helps the bottle preference. I've also noticed that some pediatricians are beginning to recommend it for formula-fed babies as well, especially if there's experiencing some reflux. And paced bottle feeding goes closely with responsive feeding practices, as I'm sure many of you have heard about before, but it's something we talk about with families a lot in terms of when their infant, if they're using a schedule to feed their infant, or feeding based off of demand. I'm sure many of you have heard of responsive feeding, and it's a big part of that is feeding on demand based off of hunger cues rather than a set schedule. For some of our families, feeding on a schedule is really important to them because of different life circumstances and just comfort levels. So we talk a lot with families and have an open dialogue around what that means, and oftentimes we'll offer a bottle at set intervals or food at set intervals, but we'll also explain to them that we'll continue to follow their cues of hunger and fullness, which may not always align with that schedule, and just having that open communication and dialogue with families. If the family is providing breast milk, we're also really encouraging them to send in small amounts to reduce the risk of waste of the breast milk. As many people call it liquid gold, and we want to make sure that our teachers are really respecting that milk and following the health and safety guidelines in terms of storage and not reusing milk and not letting it spoil or anything, but also recognizing that it's oftentimes hard for families to produce enough, especially when their kiddos in childcare. I've also noticed that teachers who haven't had a lot of experience with breastfeeding before, or maybe are young and haven't experienced breastfeeding themselves, aren't as aware of this, and just highlighting it with them when we're talking about the different practices around infant feeding. And The next slide. Family engagement is always a really big part of what we do as an early Head Start program, and have found it really helpful in supporting families in different ways. And so one of the things that is required by the state is the infant feeding plans and making sure those are updated regularly. And we found that that's a great place for families or for teachers to, ask about how things are going with the breastfeeding and if there's anything else we can do to support those families and their breastfeeding experiences. We also ended up creating a survey for families and faculty and staff who are utilizing the breastfeeding space to see what they might like to have in the centers and the designated breastfeeding areas, and also just how we might be able to support them overall with that feeding journey. And a few things that have come from that are just having extra water bottles in case they forget their water and are looking for that, having a noise or a sound machine and a Bluetooth speaker to kind of drown out some of the noises and help an infant who might be having a little bit trouble settling down after the transition. And a large chair is always important. Sometimes, especially the standard rockers that we have in the classrooms aren't as comfortable, especially for a larger infant. And then having lamps and other more muted lighting versus the overhead lights can be helpful. That transition from classroom to the designated breastfeeding area can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge, especially when they're leaving their friends and they're excited to see their caregivers. So not only do we really want to support breastfeeding families that attend our centers, but we also want to support those breastfeeding employees. And so what we ended up doing a few years ago was allowing for a set amount of breastfeeding or pumping on the clock. So similar to a bathroom break where they wouldn't clock out, they can breastfeed on the clock for, I think we have it at an hour limit a day, which is typically enough for most of our mothers, especially since oftentimes they're breastfeeding versus pumping. And it can certainly be a staffing challenge that I know a lot of centers, especially during COVID, might have a lot of, it might just be really hard. And honestly, I don't know what we would personally do if there were, 4 or 5 staff members at a time. But we've had, I think, 2 or 3 at a time utilizing this. And especially with COVID pods, we've been doing a lot more. One administrator is assigned to that classroom to support them. And that's the person who would go in and do those breaks. And it is a big commitment, but it has been worth it for us just in terms of retention. We have, we are always looking for more childcare, for more faculty and staff, and having that added benefit is a big perk for a lot of our teachers who are, childbearing ages and are looking for breastfeeding friendly workplace. I do want to just mention that as in terms of early care and education providers, Verner has a lot of resources that we are very privileged to have because of our early Head Start funding and a variety of different funding sources. And so I know that a lot of this might not be possible for everyone, but if there's anything that anything that you maybe seen, or if you'd like to talk with any of our teachers or our faculty, or use any of our posters or anything like that, we would be more than happy to help with that, because we do know that we have a lot more resources than most centers, and want to be able to support other childcare providers in making breastfeeding more accessible and normalizing it within the early care and education community. So that is it. I think I sped through that, but
You did,
Perfectly
Anya.
fine.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. This is great. And everyone, we're going to have questions and comments for Anya, and I am happy to go back to the slide of your question. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask questions, that would be great.
We did get a comment. I think this is Maria saying that she'd love to have the posters. We talked about that. I'll put a link for where the design for the posters came from. But Anya is she's happy to share at least a branded version of those flyers as well, the posters.
Yeah, we were talking about this one, and I just love the way that Anya created this. And you had said that you had gotten these from the images from, who is this from?
the National Perinatal Association, the site where they have all of the different images. This is just like 8 of the, I think, 30 or so images. They have a bunch of different people breastfeeding. They also have resources on LGBTQ plus and breastfeeding, as well as breastfeeding in different cultures and all of that. So it's a great resource in and of itself. But I have a few other options, but I can definitely share all of them out. We just created them a few weeks ago. So yeah.
So I did put several of the links. I put the Werner Center website in the chat box. I just put the National Perinatal Association breastfeeding posters, where they've created some as well that don't look as amazing as Anya's, in my opinion, but they're nice. That you can also use to share this same kind of messaging with families and staff.
And I wanted to give a shout out to our partner, CBGI, who's on here, the Carolina Global Institute, because they have downloadable posters that you can have printed or print yourself in different sizes, and they are gorgeous. The new ones are just so well done. And then I also wanted to let everyone know that Anya created the left side, also the left Werner poster with their moms. And I just think that's beautiful, because it's not just moms, it's moms that volunteer and moms that work there. So that really helps to connect people to their own spaces.
Yeah, we had a couple other comments. Darlene Brannon said, thanks, Anya. And Jennifer Anderson said, very cool to see the pictures of breastfeeding in action within a center environment. Melinda also said, thank you for sharing.
We have a question here at
Awesome.
Kids Fun Academy.
Sure.
I wanted to know, if you do the private breastfeeding area in the classroom, but not a separate area within the center, do we need to have a curtain, or because if I'm in the classroom working and the kids are playing and everything, do we need to provide extra privacy within the area in the classroom, like a curtain or anything like that? Or for the parent who's breastfeeding? Yeah, for the parent, or how can we make it more comfortable for the parent? Do we need to put a curtain up?
I'm not sure what is required for the 10 steps specifically, but I know that it really depended on the parent, whether or not they were comfortable feeding in the classroom. As you can see in this picture, this parent was more than comfortable to breastfeed in the classroom, and it was a great experience to be able to talk about it and help normalize it within for the other kiddos in the classroom. But there are some families who aren't necessarily comfortable with that, and so just I think a curtain could always be helpful, of course, making sure that it doesn't impact the supervision of the kiddos. But we do really love the accordion, like their room dividers. So even if maybe it was in the classroom, but in an office space for 15 minutes a day, someone can put that up as well. So we've done that, but I'm not sure if there are any certain requirements.
So for the licensing perspective, you are not required to have a private space. You're just required to offer a seat with the option to have a plug-in and a light and comfortable seating in the infant and toddler room that a mom is welcome to use. However, we do encourage doing a curtain. If it's in the infant toddler room, or like this one at Verner Central, they only had a closet. So I asked Anya to include it because I love it. It's so cute. We do need to get a poster in there, so I'll have to send her a poster. But they just cordoned it off with the baby gate, which is so nice. So there also is a curtain there. You can't really see, you can just see the corner of the curtain, and they pull it over. And it's an instant private spot that a mom or employee could feel comfortable breastfeeding or pumping. I just love this idea, but some centers don't have that. So if you are in the classroom, we do encourage putting in a curtain that can go around the mom if at all possible. Anybody else have any other things they'd like to add to that? Any of our breastfeeding team or other centers that have something similar that you've done that's worked really well?
I think that it definitely comes down to what the families are comfortable with, and having something available to provide if they want if they need more coverage, and if they don't care, then you're okay with that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the way our area is designed, we can put a curtain up, but it would just come so far down, just to give the mother that privacy right around the bus area, you know what I mean? And then too, because you know how children are, they want to see what's going on around the corner. So, if you put something up and they can move it, but it would be low enough, or should I say high enough, for them not to be able to touch it. But, if somebody else is in the room, of course, they're going to want to see who that is.
Yeah.
So, so that's one of the reasons why we asked that.
Yeah, and that would be great. I mean, if you have the corner that you could put up a baby gate, kind of like this one, to where it would be always away from the kids, you could do a lower curtain. But however you do it, parents are really going to appreciate that, because there's some moms that really would love the privacy, and some babies who will not breastfeed at all unless they are in quiet.
We had a comment that there was an issue with dads walking into a classroom when someone was breastfeeding and not being very comfortable. And so that may also be something to consider. You have other people that may not be the ones that have been breastfeeding that are uncomfortable with that. There was one more question. It's if we put it in the classroom, if the space ended up being in the classroom, would it change the measured space for the children?
Yes.
Yes.
Unless you have the gate would open, and it would only be, it could be available when the mom wasn't using it or the employee wasn't using it. But anybody else on here schooled in the licensing, if it's available most of the day, or does it have to be available the entire time the center is open to be in the usable space? Square footage.
I believe that it just has to be available. So say if we were talking about the space in Verner Central that's in the classroom, if the gate, if that then reduces the space in the room to where it's not within licensing, then you might need to figure out how to move the gate until a mother needed to use it, and then being able to put it back. But I think it's, and Lynn or Patty chime in if you want, but I think that has to be just available space. It doesn't have to be like that space is available to use with children. You could actually have a small group of children go into that space at some point, or take a couple of immobile children into that space, and that should be okay. I think it depends on how much space you're taking as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I understand too. This is Lynn. Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as it's available, then the space is open, then you're not taking away from your square footage.
And if it did seem like you have a small space and you can't get it, you would really remove a lot of, like, you couldn't have the same ratio of children in the classroom anymore, then you may need to not do the fence like they have at Verner Central, but just have the seating there and make it child friendly as much as possible. Yeah. I've seen lots of centers just have the seat, have all of that whole setup, but not the fence. So that there'd be just a little bit of a teacher might have to grab a baby crawling over situation, but that would be the least of the worries.
Yeah. And a lot of times, we're talking too, if putting one in the infant area, but also creating one in the center if you have the square footage, like a storage room or closet, or like what Anya was talking about, making rooms multi-purpose so that it's used space. And then that could be for your moms that want privacy and your employees to pump.
I will say that this is a conversation that we've actually created one of the learning bursts on. I can't remember what month it's in. I think it's in July or August. But so we will be coming back to this conversation and looking at all of the different varieties, including the Werner spaces, all the different varieties of spaces that we've seen, just so that you get a better idea of how you can use your space differently.
Yeah, and we really appreciate these questions because we will be coming back to them and elucidating anything out of those that, like the square footage piece, make sure that it all adheres to licensing and best practice. So join us for that one for sure.
Well, I'd like for us to go into the breakout rooms before we run out of time. I think that there were some conversations, that just having a conversation with Melinda right now in the chat box, if anybody wants to go to that. But hopefully you'll be able to talk about things that you heard in Anya's presentation that would work in your center, something that you can write down as a don't forget to come back to this kind of a situation where there's something she said, you really want to put that baby gate and a curtain up. And then if you are already doing some of these things, what can you do to start writing that into your policy? So if you've been doing it, but you don't have a policy that supports the breastfeeding supports that you're doing for families and staff, how can you start adding those things into your policies? So did anyone have any information they wanted to share back out? Anything that popped up that you want to make sure the larger group knew or heard? Might be in the chat box. If not,
and here's all of our partners. Enrich Carolina is the Carolina Global Breastfeeding Institute, where you will find amazing materials that are downloadable and printable in different sizes. Buncombe County, Orange County, Wake County, North Carolina Partnership for Children, Breastfeed Durham, and Breastfeed Orange. And a very big thank you to Anya from Werner. And Anya, that was awesome. Any last comments, questions?
I also put in the chat box, we were talking about legal things related to supporting breastfeeding employees and that kind of thing. And I have found this web page, womenshealth.gov, supporting nursing moms at work, has got a lot of really good information about what are the laws and what are you obligated to do as an employer to support breastfeeding women. And we were talking about, putting some of that language into your policy so that everybody's clear about what the rules are, particularly if you're having employees breastfeeding. I think it's a really helpful thing to be including in your center policies. So I wanted to share that resource.
And there's also workwell.org, and that's an entire toolkit for employers. And we have that in the resources list that Sean will be sending to you, right? I think great resources.
I'm Love Anderson. I am the director of Breastfeed Durham. I'm a community health worker in Durham, and I serve on the board of Breastfeeding Family Friendly Communities, which supports local communities to become breastfeeding friendly for the entire community, including step 10, which is childcare. So in Durham, I have childcare providers coming to me and saying like, hey, Love, what do I need to do for this breastfeeding friendly childcare? How do I qualify? How can I see it all at one time? And hopefully you'll get these links at the same time. And when you go to the Carolina Global Breastfeeding Institute, if you clicked on these links, and I'll put it into the chat, it takes you to a page where you sign in with your information and you get a variety of resources. And one of them is a self-assessment. There's some tools for how you can track yourself. It has a printout of the 10 steps and all sorts of rich tools, but you have to type in your username and your password to see them. I always tell people, if you want to get a sense, I love to just go ahead and print out a sample version of the self-assessment. And I often hear from childcare providers, like, there's a lot on this level. I'm not going to take, I got lots to do. I can't check all these boxes. And I get that, but I think it's a really great place to look as you're writing your policy, as you're thinking about, is this something I want to do? It just gives you a really brief overview of what's involved and some really beautiful language about using the words, instead of just saying breastfeeding, making sure that you include language like our childcare center supports exclusive breastfeeding and breastfeeding, and our staff is trained. There's just some really beautiful language in here that I find a lot of childcare centers, they will come back and they'll say, historically, the previous designation, why didn't I pass? Well, there's a couple key words that are in that designation that evaluators are looking for. And I think this just gives you a great tool as you're getting started.